Welcome to the channel, dear viewers. Today, I invite you to explore a theme as ancient as it is complex, the fear of God. Over the centuries, this notion has sparked numerous debates and inquiries. How does this fear influence our daily behavior and our deepest convictions? And above all, what is its true place in our relationship with the divine? The fear of God is a concept that resonates through the sacred texts of many religious traditions. It evokes respectful awe towards an all-powerful divine being, capable of punishing or rewarding according to our conduct. This fear can take different forms, ranging from fear of eternal consequences to motivation to follow the moral precepts dictated by faith. Some argue that the fear of God acts as a motivator for virtue and piety. It urges us to avoid evil and to seek good, for fear of divine wrath. In this perspective, the fear of God can be perceived as an essential element of spiritual discipline, reminding us of the transcendence and sovereignty of the deity. However, other voices rise to question this view of the fear of God. They highlight the dangers of a religiosity based mainly on fear and submission. Such an approach risks distorting our relationship with the divine, distancing us from a spiritual experience imbued with love, trust, and communion. Beyond theological debates, the fear of God also raises existential questions about the nature of our relationship with the divine. Is it possible to establish an authentic relationship with the deity we fear? Or does fear prevent us from fully opening ourselves to divine love and grace? In this video, we will explore in depth the different facets of the fear of God, as well as its impact on our spiritual life and beliefs. We will also address the question of the balance between respectful fear and trusting love in our relationship with the divine. The fear of God, a complex and often misunderstood notion, can take various forms and exert a profound influence on our spiritual life. As a central concept in many religious traditions, it raises fundamental questions about the nature of our relationship with the divine. To better understand its impact, we will explore 5 key aspects that shed light on how the fear of God influences our behavior and beliefs. Part 1. Motivation to obedience. In many religious traditions, the notion of the fear of God is deeply rooted as a fundamental aspect of the relationship between man and the divine. Unlike a simplistic interpretation of fear as irrational terror, it is rather seen as deep respect and reverence towards the majesty and holiness of God. This fear transcends mere apprehension of punishments or retribution, becoming a profound recognition of the greatness and transcendence of the divine being. In this perspective, the fear of God can be perceived as a form of respectful reverence towards the Creator of the universe. It is a natural reaction to the presence of the divine, an awareness of the infinite distance that separates finite man from infinite God. This metaphysical distance engenders a feeling of humble respect towards the power and sovereignty of God, as well as a recognition of His supreme authority over all creation. The fear of God can also be associated with an awareness of the holiness and purity of God. In many religious traditions, God is perceived as perfectly just, holy, and pure, without any stain of evil or imperfection. By understanding this reality, believers feel a reverential fear of approaching the divine presence lightly or disrespectfully. On the contrary, they aspire to approach God with humility and respect, recognizing the need for purification and sanctification to enter His presence. This fear of God is not a paralyzing fear, but rather an attitude of respectful respect and reverence towards the deity. It is not intended to distance us from God, but rather to bring us closer to Him with a humble and contrite heart. Ultimately, the fear of God is an essential aspect of the relationship between man and the divine, inviting us to approach the divine presence with respect and humility, while recognizing the greatness and holiness of God. The fear of God, as a moral safeguard, offers individuals an ethical compass in their daily choices and actions. The idea that our actions are scrutinized by a divine power, and that eternal consequences may result from our decisions, creates a deep moral responsibility. This awareness of responsibility towards God and towards others can significantly influence our behaviors. When faced with moral dilemmas or temptations to transgress ethical values, the fear of God can act as a force that pushes us to choose the path of integrity and righteousness. The prospect of facing negative consequences in the afterlife for our earthly actions can serve as a powerful incentive to uphold high moral principles and to act justly and kindly towards others. For example, an individual who fears God may be more inclined to resist the temptation to lie or cheat in a situation where truth and honesty are tested. This fear of God can act as an inner voice that reminds us of the fundamental values of morality, and encourages us to act in accordance with these values, even when it involves personal sacrifices. Furthermore, the fear of God can also play a significant role in preventing destructive or immoral behaviors. The awareness of the possibility of negative consequences in the afterlife can deter individuals from committing acts of violence, injustice, or cruelty towards others. This divine fear can act as a powerful restraint that limits the expression of our basest instincts, and urges us to adopt compassionate and respectful behaviors towards our fellow human beings. However, it is important to emphasize that the fear of God should not be the sole foundation of our morality. A balanced approach to ethics also includes motivations such as empathy, compassion, and respect for the rights and dignity of each individual. Furthermore, mature and evolving spirituality goes beyond mere fear of divine punishment to embrace positive values such as love, gratitude, and a desire to contribute to collective well-being. Therefore, while the fear of God may play an important role in motivating obedience, it should ideally be balanced by other aspects of the relationship with the divine, such as love, trust, and the pursuit of understanding and closeness with God. When it comes to the relationship between man and God, fear can be a motivating factor, but it should not be the sole driver. A balanced spirituality includes a range of emotions and motivations, with love and trust playing a central role. Love for God is a deeply rooted sentiment in many religious traditions. This affection for the divine stems from the recognition of His unconditional love for His creatures. In this perspective, the relationship between man and God is that of a beloved child towards his divine parent, where trust and adoration play a primordial role. This love engenders a natural desire to please God, not out of fear of reprisal, but out of gratitude and recognition for His blessings and infinite love. Trust is also a crucial element of a healthy relationship with God. Trust in God involves believing in His wisdom, goodness, and benevolence towards His faithful. It manifests itself through unwavering faith in His guidance and protection, even in the darkest and most difficult moments of life. This trust allows us to overcome the fear of the unknown and to rest in the certainty that God watches over His children with love and care. The pursuit of understanding and closeness with God is another essential aspect of a fulfilling spiritual relationship. This quest for knowledge and communion with the divine goes beyond religious obligations and fears of divine punishment. It is motivated by the deep desire to know God intimately, to understand His plans and teachings, and to find deeper meaning in life through this spiritual connection. This search for closeness with God is nourished by prayer, meditation, study of sacred texts, and spiritual contemplation. In summary, while the fear of God may be a motivating factor in the relationship with the divine, authentic and fulfilling spirituality is based on a balance of fear, love, trust, and the pursuit of understanding and closeness with God. By cultivating these elements, you can develop a deep and meaningful relationship with the divine, founded on love, trust, and the search for spiritual truth. Part 2. Influence on beliefs. The fear of God, while often presented as a means of disciplining and guiding believers, can also have subtle but significant effects on our perception of spirituality. Indeed, when fear becomes the primary driver of our relationship with God, it risks distorting our understanding of His nature and intentions. The fear of God is a deeply rooted notion in many religious and philosophical traditions around the world. Often presented as a means of disciplining and guiding believers, it is supposed to encourage them to follow the moral and ethical precepts dictated by their faith. However, behind this appearance of discipline and guidance, lie subtle but significant effects on our perception of spirituality and our relationship with God. When fear becomes the primary driver of our relationship with God, it risks distorting our understanding of His nature and intentions. Instead of seeing God as a benevolent, loving, and merciful being, we often perceive him as a severe, authoritarian, and punishing being. This distorted perception of divinity can have profound repercussions on our spirituality and our relationship with God. Firstly, it can affect our self-image as divine creatures. Instead of seeing ourselves as beloved and accepted children of God, we often view ourselves as unworthy sinners, constantly under the critical and severe gaze of our Creator. This self-deprecating mindset can lead to feelings of shame, guilt, and unworthiness, thus preventing us from fully living the spiritual life to which we are called. Furthermore, the fear of God can distort our understanding of faith and religious practice. Rather than seeking an intimate and personal relationship with God, we often focus on scrupulously observing rules, rituals, and religious doctrines, in the hope of avoiding divine punishment. This legalistic approach to spirituality can lead us into a cycle of performance and self-justification, thus distancing us from the true essence of faith. The fear of God can create barriers in our relationship with Him. Instead of approaching God with confidence and openness, we keep ourselves at a distance for fear of His anger and judgment. This fear of intimacy with the divine can prevent us from fully receiving His love and grace, leaving us in a state of separation and spiritual despair. Indeed, the fear of God can have profound and lasting ramifications on the mental and spiritual health of individuals. It can create a toxic environment where guilt, anxiety, and self-deprecation thrive, distancing believers from the love and freedom that God desires for them. It is therefore essential to question and reject erroneous interpretations of God that fuel fear, and instead seek to cultivate a relationship based on love, grace, and trust. Even worse, the fear of God can sometimes be insidiously exploited by unscrupulous religious leaders to exercise total control over their followers. By skillfully manipulating the fears and anxieties of believers, these individuals can establish a climate of fear and submission within their religious community. In some cases, these leaders use the fear of God as a means of maintaining their authority and hold over their followers. They exaggerate the consequences of sin and divine disobedience, presenting a merciless God ready to severely punish every transgression. This distorted vision of spirituality creates a sense of urgency among believers, urging them to strictly conform to the teachings and directives of religious leaders to avoid divine punishment. Furthermore, these leaders may exploit the fear of God to justify abusive and controlling behaviors. By asserting their supposed spiritual authority, they encourage believers to submit meekly to their demands, even if they go against their emotional, physical, or spiritual well-being. This exploitation of fear creates a vicious circle where believers find themselves trapped in a toxic and unbalanced relationship with their faith and religious community. As a result, the fear of God becomes an instrument of manipulation and oppression, distancing believers from the true freedom and happiness that God desires for them. Instead of nurturing a relationship of trust and love with their Creator, believers are drawn into a cycle of fear and submission, where their faith is exploited for selfish and contrary purposes to the fundamental values of love and compassion. It is therefore crucial to recognize the signs of abusive use of the fear of God by religious leaders and to remain vigilant against any form of exploitation or manipulation. By seeking a deeper understanding of the true nature of God as a being of love and grace, believers can regain the freedom and inner peace that God desires for them, away from the traps of fear and manipulation. It is essential to recognize that the fear of God can have profound and lasting ramifications in the spiritual life of individuals. When fear becomes the primary driver of our relationship with God, it can transform our perception of His divine nature and intentions towards us. Instead of seeing God as a loving and compassionate Father, we risk perceiving Him solely as a severe and uncompromising judge, ready to punish every fault with severity. This distorted view of God can then influence every aspect of our spiritual life. It can color our prayers and religious practices, pushing us to adopt an approach based on performance rather than grace and personal relationship. We may constantly feel under the weight of condemnation and guilt, unable to approach God with confidence and assurance. Furthermore, the fear of God can have repercussions on our relationship with others and on how we live out our faith on a daily basis. If we are constantly preoccupied with the fear of divine judgment, it is likely that we are also inclined to judge and condemn others, creating a toxic and alienating environment within our faith communities. Yet, it is important to realize that the fear of God is not the true foundation of the Christian faith. On the contrary, Jesus teaches us that God is a loving and merciful Father, ready to forgive our mistakes and welcome us into His arms with love and tenderness. By cultivating a relationship based on love and trust in God, we can find peace and joy that surpass all understanding, freeing us from the grip of fear and allowing us to live fully in the light of His grace. Part 3. Constraint or Liberation? In our spiritual quest, the question of the fear of God and its effect on our freedom is of crucial importance. Some consider the fear of God to act as a mechanism of constraint, pushing us to follow religious precepts out of fear of the consequences. In this perspective, fear is perceived as a barrier to true spiritual freedom. It keeps us in a state of conformity based on fear rather than on voluntary and joyful commitment to spirituality. The fear of God can manifest in different ways. Some religious traditions emphasize divine punishments and the eternal consequences of sin, thereby creating an atmosphere of fear and guilt among the faithful. In this context, the fear of God is often associated with a legalistic approach to religion, where observance of rules and rituals is motivated primarily by fear of punishment rather than by a genuine desire to please God. This approach can have detrimental consequences on our spiritual development. Rather than cultivating an authentic and deep relationship with God based on love and trust, fear can compel us to act out of obligation or fear of divine anger. We may then find ourselves trapped in a cycle of ritualistic behaviors and negative thoughts, gradually moving away from the true essence of spirituality. Furthermore, the fear of God can also lead to a distorted view of divinity. By focusing solely on the severe and punitive aspects of God, we risk losing sight of His loving and merciful nature. This reductionist view of God can prevent us from experiencing the fullness of His love and grace, leaving us in a state of constant fear and insecurity. However, it is important to recognize that the fear of God can also have a positive aspect. For some, the fear of God can be a catalyst for spiritual growth. It can prompt us to seek moral purity and avoid harmful behaviors, guiding us toward a more fulfilling life path aligned with spiritual values. On the other hand, others see the fear of God as a means of freeing us from the temptations and traps of the material world. By reminding us of divine sovereignty and justice, fear can serve as a moral compass, helping us avoid destructive actions and follow a path of righteousness and piety. In this perspective, the fear of God can be seen as an ally in our struggle against sin and human weaknesses, offering us a path to a more fulfilling life aligned with divine will. In this deeper perspective, the fear of God is considered an ally in our spiritual journey, providing us with a moral guide to navigate through the challenges and temptations of everyday life. By acknowledging divine sovereignty and justice, the fear of God reminds us of the consequences of our actions and encourages us to make choices aligned with spiritual values and religious teachings. The fear of God then acts as a lighthouse in the storm, illuminating our path and helping us avoid moral pitfalls that could compromise our spiritual well-being. It invites us to reflection and self-examination, prompting us to examine our motivations and behaviors in the light of religious teachings and ethical principles. By understanding that our actions have consequences, both in this life and in the afterlife according to religious beliefs, the fear of God urges us to cultivate values such as compassion, justice, and generosity. It encourages us to be agents of good in the world, contributing to the building of a more just and loving society. Furthermore, the fear of God can also serve as a catalyst for spiritual growth and personal transformation. By confronting us with our own weaknesses and human limitations, it urges us to seek forgiveness and redemption, offering us the opportunity to repent and improve as individuals. In this perspective, the fear of God is not a source of despair or discouragement, but rather a call to action and responsibility. It encourages us to live a life of virtue and piety, offering us the opportunity to align ourselves with divine will and to realize our full potential as spiritual beings. The perception of the fear of God is a complex facet of human spirituality, shaped by a multitude of individual and contextual factors. Religious education plays a crucial role in how we understand and interpret the fear of God. The teachings passed down by our religious traditions, whether they emphasize divine justice or unconditional love of God, can shape our relationship with fear and its impact on our spiritual life. Moreover, our personal experiences play a significant role in shaping our perception of the fear of God. The events of our lives, whether marked by moments of divine comfort and protection or by periods of distress and despair, can influence how we perceive God's presence and action in our lives. Positive experiences can strengthen our confidence in God, while negative experiences can evoke fears and doubts. The question of whether the fear of God liberates us or binds us is much more than a simple theological dilemma. It invites us to deep introspection and personal exploration of our relationship with the divine. For some, the fear of God can be a driving force, prompting them to act according to religious precepts out of fear of potential consequences. In this perspective, fear is perceived as a means of divine control, acting as a barrier against sin and a moral guide for a virtuous life. However, such an approach raises questions about the very nature of our relationship with God. Is our connection with the divine based on fear and submission, or on love and trust? This dichotomy highlights the different theological and spiritual paradigms that shape our understanding of faith. On the other hand, some theologians and mystics suggest that true spiritual liberation lies in transcending fear. They teach that God is love and that fear has no place in an authentic relationship with the divine. Rather than being motivated by fear of divine punishments, we should be guided by God's love and grace, seeking to draw near to Him by choice and desire rather than by constraint. This raises the question of whether the fear of God is truly necessary to live a pious and righteous life. Some argue that fear can be an initial catalyst in our spiritual journey, prompting us to become aware of our human condition and need for salvation. However, once we have encountered God's grace and love, fear should give way to trust and worship. Ultimately, the answer to the question of whether the fear of God liberates us or binds us largely depends on our own interpretation and personal experience. It is essential to carefully examine our own beliefs and convictions while respecting the perspectives and experiences of others. Whether we choose to view fear as an obstacle or as a stepping stone in our journey of faith, what matters most is how we choose to live our relationship with the divine, guided by love, compassion, and the pursuit of spiritual truth. Part 4. Striking a balance between fear and love. In our relationship with God, the dynamic between respectful fear and confident love shapes our very understanding of spirituality and deeply influences how we interact with the divine. This delicate tension between these two pillars of human relationship with the divine lies at the heart of our quest for meaning and transcendence. Respectful fear toward God is much more than mere apprehension or terror in the face of His omnipotence. It is a profound recognition of His holiness and majesty, a keen awareness of our smallness in the face of His infinite greatness. This fear is not motivated by fear of divine punishment, but rather by sacred respect for the One who is above all and whose presence fills us with reverential awe. On the other hand, confident love toward God transcends the boundaries of human understanding. It is an unconditional, infinite, and unchanging love that binds us to Him in a deep and intimate way. It is a love that embraces our humanity in all its fragility and vulnerability, offering us unwavering security and assurance in our relationship with Him. Finding the balance between these two poles of the relationship with God is essential for a fulfilling spirituality. Too often, we fall into excess by either favoring excessive fear or love devoid of respect and reverence for the divine transcendence. Excessive fear can lead us to legalistic and oppressive religiosity, where we live in constant fear of a distant and severe God. On the other hand, love devoid of fear can lead us to a disconcerting familiarity with the divine, where we lose sight of His holiness and sovereignty, reducing Him to a mere friend or confidant. The key lies in understanding the complex nature of God, a God who is both holy and loving, just and merciful. It is in the tension between respectful fear and confident love that we discover the true essence of our relationship with Him. It is by cultivating this delicate tension that we deepen our understanding of God and our experience of His presence in our lives. On the other hand, love for God is much more than just a feeling. It is the very foundation of our relationship with the divine. This love transcends human limits, going far beyond our earthly understanding of affection and tenderness. It is unconditional, eternal, and infinite. It is a love that surpasses our merit or our ability to deserve it, enveloping us in its grace and mercy in a way that surpasses all human understanding. When we are imbued with this divine love, we are transformed. We are lifted above our weaknesses and imperfections because we are constantly reminded of our worth and identity as beloved children of God. This love gives us unwavering confidence, a deep assurance that we are loved unconditionally, without reservation or condition. Through this love, we find the courage to approach God boldly and confidently. We do not have to fear rejection or condemnation because we know that God always welcomes us with open arms. It is a love that frees us from fear and gives us the freedom to express our joys, sorrows, doubts, and hopes before the throne of grace. In our relationship with God, this love plays a central role. It is the thread that connects every aspect of our spiritual life. It is through this love that we are forgiven and restored, healed and renewed. It is through this love that we are called to love others, to serve with humility, and to share the good news of the gospel with the world. This love knows no bounds, no boundaries. It transcends cultural, linguistic, and social barriers, uniting all who receive it in divine communion. It is a love that unites us not only to God but also to one another, forming a community of faith and fraternity where each person is valued, respected, and loved. The key lies in understanding the complex nature of God, a God who is both holy and loving, just and merciful. This understanding invites us to explore the paradoxes of divinity and to recognize that God surpasses our human understanding. On one hand, God is holy and transcendent. His holiness is dazzling and immaculate, surpassing all imperfection and sin. This holiness inspires fear and respect, reminding us of the infinite distance between the Creator and His creation. However, this holiness is not inaccessible. It is revealed in His closeness to those who seek Him with a sincere heart, offering the possibility of an intimate relationship despite His greatness. On the other hand, God is loving and compassionate. His love is infinite and unconditional, embracing every person without discrimination. Those who turn to Him in repentance and faith discover the depth of His love. That forgives and restores. This love gives us the confidence to approach God with assurance, knowing that His arms are always open to welcome us. However, it is important to recognize that God's love does not negate His justice. God is as just as He is merciful, and His holiness requires Him to respond to sin with righteousness. This is where the tension between fear and love lies. We fear God's justice, but we find refuge in His love and grace. By cultivating a respectful fear that acknowledges God's majesty and a confident love that embraces His grace, we can deepen our relationship with Him. This balanced approach allows us to navigate with confidence through the complexity of spiritual life, finding refuge in God's love while respecting His holiness and justice. In this tension between fear and love, we discover the true essence of our relationship with God. It is a relationship characterized by respect and reverence, but also by intimacy and confidence. It is in this tension that we grow and mature spiritually, finding our place in the heart of God and experiencing the fullness of His grace and infinite love. Finding the balance between respectful fear and confident love in our relationship with God is a profound and essential quest for a fulfilling spirituality. This delicate tension between fear and love constitutes the very heart of our relationship with the divine, inviting us to dive into the depths of our being and explore the mysteries of faith. Respectful fear toward God compels us to recognize His greatness and holiness. It is a fear that awakens in us a profound respect for His power and majesty, reminding us of our position as creatures before the Almighty Creator. This fear prompts us to bow before God with humility and submission, acknowledging our weakness and dependence on Him. It helps us to realize the transcendence of God and our constant need for His grace and guidance in our lives. On the other hand, confident love toward God is the foundation of our relationship with Him. It is a love that goes beyond human limits, embracing our entire being and enveloping us in His infinite grace. It is a love that reassures us in times of doubt and fear, reminding us of the promise of God's constant presence with us. It is a love that gives us the strength to persevere in times of difficulty and to rejoice in times of joy, knowing that we are loved with an eternal and unconditional love. Finding the balance between respectful fear and confident love is not an easy task. It requires a continuous commitment to deepen our relationship with God, to cultivate an attitude of reverence and love for Him in all dimensions of our lives. It also requires an openness to God's grace that transforms and renews us from within, helping us to grow in our faith and trust in Him. It is in this tension between fear and love that we discover the true essence of our relationship with the divine. It is in this tension that we are shaped and transformed, guided on the path of spiritual growth and intimacy with God. It is in this tension that we find the peace and fulfillment that come from living in communion with the Creator of the universe, knowing that we are loved and known by Him in a deep and personal way. Ultimately, finding the balance between respectful fear and confident love in our relationship with God is a continuous spiritual journey. It is a journey that leads us ever closer to the truth of who God is and who we are in Him. It is a journey that enriches and transforms us, allowing us to live fully in the light of His presence and infinite love. Part 5. Journeying towards a deeper relationship. Ultimately, our relationship with God transcends preconceived concepts and established norms. It is an intimate and deeply personal journey, where each individual explores and discovers the divine in their own unique way. The fear of God, often induced by the perception of His transcendence and infinite power, can be a companion on this journey, but it should not dictate our relationship with the divine. God's transcendence, His nature beyond our human understanding, can evoke a sense of awe and wonder. It is the awareness of His infinite greatness and majesty that can make us feel insignificant in His presence. Yet, this fear should not paralyze us or deter us from exploring our relationship with God. On the contrary, it should motivate us to deepen our understanding and connection with the divine. The fear of God can also stem from the perception of His justice and judgment. In many religious traditions, God is seen as the ultimate judge, capable of punishing or rewarding based on our actions. This fear of divine punishment can influence our behaviors and beliefs, prompting us to seek piety and obedience to avoid divine wrath. However, such a perspective can also limit our relationship with God, reducing it to a mere transaction based on fear and reward. Yet, the fear of God should not be the primary foundation of our relationship with Him. Instead, our spiritual quest should be guided by love, trust, and a desire for communion with the divine. Rather than fearing punishment, we should seek to draw near to God out of love and gratitude for His infinite grace and mercy. To move beyond the fear of God and cultivate an authentic relationship, we must embrace our humanity while recognizing God's transcendence. This means accepting our doubts, questions, and imperfections, while turning to God with confidence and openness. It also means recognizing that God is a God of love and compassion, who always welcomes us with open arms, no matter our fears or weaknesses. However, the fear of God can also be fertile ground for manipulation and abuse of power. In some religious traditions or institutions, the fear of God is exploited to control believers, impose rigid standards, and maintain institutional status quo. Religious leaders may use fear as a tool of coercion, instilling guilt and shame to maintain their authority and influence. This abusive use of the fear of God can create a toxic environment where individuals feel trapped in a cycle of fear, blind obedience, and submission. The fear of divine punishment can be used to manipulate believers, prompting them to follow rules and doctrines without questioning or challenging received teachings. In such contexts, the fear of God becomes a major obstacle to a healthy and authentic relationship with the divine. Rather than encouraging a spiritual quest based on love, trust, and the search for truth, it breeds mistrust, division, and spiritual stagnation. Individuals may fear divine judgment instead of turning to God with confidence and hope. Moreover, this exploitation of the fear of God can also have detrimental consequences on individuals' mental and emotional health. Constant guilt and fear can lead to feelings of depression, anxiety, and self-deprecation, undermining the quality of life and well-being of believers. It is therefore essential to recognize the dangers of abusive use of the fear of God and to promote a more balanced and compassionate approach to spirituality. Rather than exploiting fear to maintain control, religious leaders and communities must encourage love, respect, and spiritual autonomy of individuals. To journey towards a deeper relationship with God, we must delve into the complexity of His divine nature. Firstly, we must acknowledge and meditate on God's transcendence, His greatness and superiority over all creation. This leads us to contemplate His omnipotence, infinite wisdom, and omnipresence in the universe. God's transcendence evokes a respectful fear and humility before His incomparable majesty. At the same time, we must also understand God's immanence, His intimate and living presence in our daily lives. God is not only a distant and abstract force but also a close and compassionate companion who walks with us through the joys and sorrows of life. Recognizing God's immanence allows us to feel His comforting presence and to open ourselves to a personal relationship with Him. Furthermore, we must meditate on God's holiness, His absolute purity and perfection. The awareness of God's holiness urges us to seek purity and righteousness in our own lives, in order to approach God with respect and devotion. However, this awareness of our own imperfection can also engender fear of inadequacy and condemnation before God's holiness. This is where God's mercy comes into play. We must remember that God is a being of grace and compassion, full of kindness and patience towards His children. His mercy surpasses our human understanding and offers a refuge for those who turn to Him with a repentant heart. Recognizing God's mercy frees us from the fear of His condemnation and allows us to approach His presence with confidence and hope. Finally, we must remember that God ardently desires an intimate relationship with each of us. He calls us to draw near to Him in prayer, meditation, and study of His Word. He invites us to open our hearts to Him, to share our joys and sorrows, and to receive His guidance and unconditional love. In this relationship of love and trust, fear gives way to peace and the certainty that we are fully accepted and loved by our Creator. In summary, the fear of God can be a complex and often controversial element of our spiritual journey. It can evoke feelings of respect, reverence, and even apprehension in the face of divine transcendence and holiness. However, it is crucial not to let this fear immobilize us or deter us from seeking an authentic and deep relationship with the divine. The fear of God can be perceived as a natural response to the awareness of our own finitude and the infinite greatness of divinity. It can remind us of our position as human beings before an infinitely superior and mysterious power. This awareness can be both humbling and inspiring, prompting us to seek a deeper understanding of God and our place in the universe. However, the fear of God can also be misinterpreted or exploited for coercive or controlling purposes. It can be used to instill guilt, promote religious conformity, and maintain institutional power. In such cases, the fear of God not only becomes an obstacle to a healthy relationship with the divine but can also cause psychological and emotional harm. To journey towards a deeper relationship with God, it is essential to cultivate a balanced understanding of divinity, recognizing both His transcendence and immanence, His holiness and mercy. It is important to understand that God is a being of infinite love, immeasurable grace, and boundless compassion, who ardently desires an intimate and personal relationship with each of us. In this quest for an authentic relationship with God, we must also cultivate attitudes of trust and openness. Rather than being dominated by fear, we must turn to God with faith and hope, relying on His promise of unconditional love and constant support. We must embrace the idea that our relationship with God is an invitation to grow, to evolve, and to flourish as spiritual beings. In conclusion, the fear of God, although often present in religious discourse and spiritual traditions, can have complex implications for our behavior and beliefs. Some people find in this fear a motivation to follow religious precepts and avoid sin out of fear of eternal consequences. For others, however, this fear may alter their vision of spirituality, creating an image of God as a severe and punitive being, thus distancing individuals from a relationship based on love and trust. It is essential to understand that our relationship with God should not be based solely on fear but rather on love and trust. God is often described as a being of unconditional love, compassion, and mercy, who desires a deep and authentic relationship with each of us. In our spiritual quest, it is important to find a balance between respectful fear and confident love, recognizing that God always welcomes us with open arms, ready to guide us on the path of life. Thank you for joining me today to explore this complex topic. Feel free to share your own thoughts and experiences in the comments below. Together, let us continue to deepen our understanding of faith and spirituality. See you soon.